Lord our God, you wanted to live not only in heaven, but also with us here on earth, not only to be great and high, but also to be small and lowly, just as we are. Not only to be God in eternity, but also to be born as a person, to live and to die. In your dear Son, you've given us none other than yourself, so that we may wholly belong to you. And this affects all of us, even though none of us deserve it. What remains for us to do but to wonder and rejoice and to be thankful and hold fast for what you have done? Let this hour and our listening, our singing, our praying be our gift to you of praise. Amen. As humans, we are imitating machines. This isn't how we like to think of ourselves. We want to believe that we are autonomous agents, that we are in control of our lives, that we're unique and different and our own people. But in reality, humans are chameleons. We are mimicking machines. We instinctively imitate one another. We synchronize our bodies, our actions, even the way that we speak to each other when we are around others. It's been 25 years since scientists at the University of Parma made a discovery that radically altered how we now know our brains function. And these scientists discovered that in the premotor cortex of our brain, there are neurons which subconsciously cause us to imitate those that are around us. We now call those mirror neurons, but many scientists say that they probably would be better be called our motor resonance system. We resound, we reenact the things that we see. For those less familiar with mirror neurons, as humans, we are born with underdeveloped sensory fields, some active mirror neurons, a propensity to imitate, and the capacity to develop more of these mirror neurons. In other words, we are born to engage and mirror the things that we see around us. And so we know that babies, just a few hours old, they learn to mimic gestures such as blinking and hand gestures. And that's because we are all born with mirror neurons. And the more we imitate, the more that we develop and create the mirror neurons that are in our brain. So here's how one neuroscientist, Marco Iacoboni, articulates how mirror neurons are developed. A baby smiles. The parent smiles in response. 2 minutes later, the baby smiles again and the parent smiles again. And thanks to the imitative behavior of the parent, the baby's brain associates the motor plan necessary to smile at the sight of a smiling face. And we saw that today, did we not? We see a smiling face and it causes them to smile. You see a crunched up nose and you've tempted to crunch up your nose as well. And in that instance, presto, he says, mirror neurons for a smiling face are born. And the next time a baby sees someone else's smile, the neural activity associated with the motor plan for smiling is evoked in that baby's brain, and therefore they will simulate a smile. And so we know that because of mirror neurons, in essence, our development as humans is circular. The more that we engage in relational activities and experiences, the more our mirror neurons are developed and transformed, which means the more we have the ability to imitate and experience others in the future. So here's an example. One we're all familiar with is yawning. All of us have experienced, right? Us yawning when other people yawn, even if we're not tired. Scientists now know that when you see someone yawn, or even just hear it, our mirror neurons in our brains activate. And that will in turn cause us to respond in the same action. As I'll explain later, the closer you are to someone, the more likely or the more of these mirror neurons tend to activate. And what's so interesting is it even works cross species. If I yawn, my dog will yawn because she's so close to me. You can actually tell a lot about someone if they yawn or do not yawn when you yawn. If they don't, they probably don't like you very much. While I don't believe that Jesus and Paul ever understood what was going on in our brains and how mirror neurons work, I'm convinced that both of them were pretty aware of how we actually function neurologically. They understood that we are mirroring people that grow and develop by mirroring others. I chose this morning 2 texts from Paul, which we often don't appreciate because we often accuse Paul of being arrogant and boastful in them, and it's easy to see why. I urge you all to be imitators of me, or be imitators of me just as I imitate Jesus. But the more that we know about this world of mirror neurons and how our brains function, the more statements like this just make sense. For the more we imitate someone, the more we actually become them. The more we feel, look, or even look and think like them. We know that partners, after 25 years, their faces look more alike because they mirror the same smiles and frowns and everything else over time. Because of mirror neurons, when we imitate, the space between the self and others, it actually begins to collapse. And we actually do become more like the other person over time. We learn to engage the world, in a sense, like they do. This week, I learned some interesting research that people at Yale are doing about role models and mirror neurons. And what this research is teaching us is the importance of who we choose as role models, especially when we're kids. For we have to mirror people. That's just how our brains develop. We can't control that. But what we can choose is who we imitate. And the people that inspire us, they literally alter our brain's development, which in turn alters our characteristics, our beliefs, and our values. And the more that we imitate them and the more that we model them, the more our brains actually becomes a bit like theirs. The more we naturally do the things they do, the more we see the world the way they see it. And in Corinthians, Paul seems to gather some sliver of this. So Paul tells his friends, imitate me. Let me be one of the people that shows you what it means to be like Jesus. If you dare to move your body like I do, it will help you simulate Jesus's life. Imitate me as I imitate Jesus. We all have to imitate something. Jesus, too, seemed to understand the importance of mirroring. And this is why Jesus' first action after becoming and announcing his public ministry is finding disciples. Jesus wanted to find people who were willing to move their bodies like he moved his, people who were devoted themselves to mimicking his life. And the reason Jesus did this is because Jesus understood that if real change is going to happen in this world, it's going to happen on an individual level, or what we now know, a neurological level. For the more we know about mirror neurons, the more Jesus' actions of calling disciples make sense. For our mirror neuron systems, they're developed not when we learn in the same way or when we read, but when we dare to act like someone else. For this is what opens our minds so our imaginations and perceptions can be altered and expanded in the future. For example, we know that the more that you dance, the more your mirror neurons are able to fire when you watch people that dance. If you don't know how to dance, you're not going to resonate with the way that their bodies move. But then when you mirror them, you'll be able to mirror them more in the future. And it seems to me that Jesus at least conceptually understood that the more that you get people to move differently, to resonate differently, the more that you're able to open them up to new worlds and new possibilities that seemed impossible to them before. And that's why Jesus begins his ministry with discipleship. Asking people to move like him, that's the key to imaginative action. And that helps me understand why Jesus had to be human. Why Jesus didn't just give us some new teachings, but chose to live a life like ours. Because Jesus knew if we're ever going to become more human, more fully human, that we needed someone to show us the way. We needed someone to give us something different to mirror. Someone who would enable our brains to fire differently. So Jesus showed us what it means to live the life that God intended for us. so that people would have something different to imitate, so that we'd actually be able to develop those mirror neurons that can make us actually be like Jesus. There are so many interesting applications of mirror neurons. Scientists are discovering and researching how we can use them to make our society more nonviolent. And it is so important to parenting because kids are going to mirror their parents. And that is, in essence, going to help them interact and figure out how they're going to interact with the world. But mirror neurons teach us also a lot about how we can cultivate compassion. For mirror neurons, they don't just enable us to mirror what other people are doing. There's a small portion of our mirror neurons that actually enable us to feel or simulate other people's pain. For when we watch another, we subconsciously mirror the facial expressions, the muscle movements, right? The pinching of the nose that we see. And this in turn, it activates in our emotional brain centers so that we can recall the emotions that we felt when we had similar actions or similar facial expressions or similar movements in our bodies. Our brains simulate the observed emotional experiences of others. And as if they're happening to us, but though maybe not as strongly as if they're happening to another. And that's why we grimace and we actually feel pain when we watch someone stub their toe on a door. Our mirror neurons in our brain, they function as if that's happened to us for when it happens to us. And so we remember what it felt like when we stubbed our toe on that door. Once neuroscientists begin to realize this, many wondered if mirror neurons might actually be the key to help us cultivate empathy and compassion. It is said that you never really know what another is feeling. And I think this is still partially true. But what mirror neurons teach us is that the more that we're around people, the more that we allow our bodies to mirror theirs, the more we become like them and can understand them and actually feel their frustrations and their pains, their excitements, their joys, and their hopes. So if we want to cultivate compassion and we want to help ourselves become more empathetic, then it means that we need to be around other people who experience the world differently than us so that we can mirror their lives, mirror their bodies, mirror their movements. Cultivating compassion, that's about experiencing resonant relationships where we intentionally engage others across difference for long periods of time. So they give our chance and our bodies the opportunity to imitate the people that we see, imitate those who experience the world differently than us so that we can actually feel like they feel. And then we can understand them just a bit. But there's a catch, and it's a big catch. When we fail to imitate, it's almost impossible for us to actually feel. For example, if we clench a pencil tightly between our teeth, it disrupts the mimetic facial dance that ceaselessly occurs between people who are before one another. And this disruption, it greatly reduces our efficiency to detect the emotional changes in other people's facial expressions. If we can't smile when they're smiling, our brains don't function and tell us that they're happy. And because of that pencil, we can't then recognize and feel their emotions. Well, the same thing is actually true with how fear and anger work as well. When our body is tense, when we're scared and when we're anxious, our mirror neurons, they don't function right. Our body doesn't mirror other people. And it's actually as if that person right in front of us is never actually encountered. They're not even real to us. They're invisible to our brains. And this is why fear is just so dangerous. Neurologically, our brains are not able to feel empathy, compassion, and love to someone when we're afraid. So that's why we are isolating ourselves off. We wall ourselves off during those times. We retreat and we decide to be around people who are like us, because those are the people who we aren't afraid to mirror. And sadly, this cycle, it only reinforces our fear. The sad reality is that we live in a society that is deeply lacking compassion. And you could say that our society is experiencing breakdown in its mirror neuron system. And this pandemic, it has only amplified this breakdown, and our political landscape sure isn't helping. All of it, it's debilitating us. Far too often, we socialize and spend time with people who are more or less like us. And even more, our society, it trains us to be afraid of people who are different than us. And this means that we're not imitating others who experience this world differently. We're not developing our mirror neurons in ways that enable us to understand and feel other people's pains and joys and struggles. We can't empathize, we can't feel like they are, so there's no way that we're ever going to be able to bridge the gap between us. In essence, this means that they're not even real to our worlds. We can't sense them as being part of the same world as us. But we don't have to live that way. For Jesus reminds us that if real change is going to occur in this world, it's going to happen at an individual level, a neurological level. And we can do the work to revitalize our mirror neuron systems so that our lives full of empathy and love and compassion and grace. And we do this by moving our bodies like Jesus moved his, by offering a glass of cold water to a stranger, by clothing the sick and visiting those in prison, by crossing over and receptively encountering people who we've been taught are unlike us, who we've been taught to fear, by refusing to give in to the anxiety and the fear that seem to be everywhere. Jesus did all of these things, and so can we. In other words, cultivating compassion, it is intricately tied to the heart of the Christian faith. And that's simply being with. We can't cultivate compassion in the same way when we do things for other people, when we write a check, or when we help somebody but don't want to get close to them, because our mirror neuron systems, they just don't function that way. Compassion grows by spending time with others, by allowing our bodies to mirror theirs, by not letting our anxiety and fear rule us. Compassion is cultivated when we vulnerably and openly take time to be with difference, especially with those that we've either avoided or we've never been given the opportunity to be present alongside. It happens when we allow ourselves to simply enjoy someone else for their own sake, to mirror them, to smile with them, to frown with them. It means delighting in and also embracing the uniqueness of other people. In the end, cultivating compassion, it all comes down to the most important word of the Christian faith: with. Amen.